Hello, everyone. Welcome to our community call for today in June. Just going to share my screen. Oh, I'm on the wrong thing, as always, but we're going to talk about weight training as it's something that comes up, gets brought up quite a lot. When I first started running as well myself, I'm sure James did as well, you just went out and ran and you had no idea about all this data. But then data comes into play and then you start to try and understand what is this and how can this benefit my training potentially. Okay. So heart rate training. Now, let me just minimize this. So if we're gonna talk about different types of training, so we're going to talk about heart rate, pace, and effort, but we're going to start off with heart rate training to begin with. So heart rate is obviously using our heart rate, which is how many times our heart beats per minute. So BPM is what we see and use. And this is monitoring our effort whilst running. Obviously, this style of training, we stay within different training zones, and this helps us not to overexert our training. We'll come on to the different zones and what they mean coming up. And obviously, we know with our heart rate, most watches nowadays have a monitor based in your watch so that it's via your wrist. However, now there's more technology out there. Obviously, there was the chest strap, and then now there is an arm strap, which Coros does, which James has. And how have you found that versus the chest strap?
Pretty much the same as the chest, but more comfortable for me for the heart ones.
The only thing that James had a problem with is
it would slip when it's sweaty.
no, tan lines.
Oh, with the bands.
So he's getting a tan line around his arm now. Not that that's not
date.
Yeah.
Data.
So yeah, with heart rate monitors, obviously, these are a few different ones that are on the market. So a lot of people just go for the Garmin chest strap. What I found, I had this one previously, James has had this one as well. What we found with this strap is that sometimes it got a bit uncomfortable. It could sometimes slip down, like James says, if it gets too sweaty. And they now have one for females, which probably should have shown. And I know that Penny was asking about this, and this clips onto the bottom of your sports bra. So this is just useful for anyone that might be thinking of investing in one of these in the future. So I have had the one that I do use it now. But one thing that I have found is that, again, with the sports bra, it was kind of moving and not recording properly. So I think on my recent half marathon, it must have moved around a bit and my heart rate was a lot lower than what I knew my effort was actually what I was exerting. And a good tip that Naomi actually showed me was to move the strap over to the left hand side a little bit so then it didn't move, and then also as well, like, your heart is positioned slightly to the left. So if anyone has got that chest strap or is looking to invest in that in the future, then that is just a little bit of a tip. Obviously there's the Coros band, and I believe that it works with other watches.
Like Bluetooth, so.
So you can buy that even if you don't have a Coros, if you would prefer something like an armband. And then they've got things like Polar, Wahoo. Also as well, there's other ones out there on the market that you can invest in and buy. So heart rate zones. So if you don't know about zones, we're going to talk about a little about them now. So this is a set range, and there's 5 different heart rate zones that are predominantly used. Didn't you say Coros have like thrown in a 6th?
Yeah, I've seen Garmin put a 6 in there sometimes. I've even seen 7 are different. So
we're not going to confuse anyone. We're just going to go for the 5 different heart rate zones today. Okay, welcome to anyone that is joining us. I'm just letting you all in as and when. But yeah, just talking about heart rate today. So now we're going to talk about how to work out heart rate zones, and normally they're worked out by using your maximum heart rate and then working down in percentages down from that. The way to kind of find your maximum heart rate is by, there's various age-based formulas. So you go for 220 minus your age. However, we have found that that is not particularly accurate.
Not really, no. I'd say generally amongst our group, people are fitter than the average. And obviously this is with a pinch of salt and based on the average population. So
yeah,
so that's not quite right.
One of the best ways to actually identify your maximum heart rate would be going into a lab to get tested. However, we understand that this is not accessible for everyone because it does come at a cost. So the best way to do that is to looking at historical heart rate data. And it might be you find a recent race or a interval-based session where you're working really hard and you're working at your top capacity, and that's likely going to record a rough average heart rate. So for example,
and again, when we say working hard, that's for a small amount of time. It's not like, oh, I worked really hard in that tempo session for half an hour. That's not your maximum heart rate.
Yeah. So I've seen a couple of things online where potentially you could do, you know, some really short reps, so like 2 to 3 minutes, and repeat a couple of those. And you're going to see, sorry, I've just had an influx of people joining us. So welcome to everyone. We're just talking about heart rate training. We haven't got too far. I've just been talking about just now going into zones. So yeah, I looked at a recent race, for example. What race did we do 5K wise? What was that one? Where did we do it? Battersea. And that gave me a recent kind of max heart rate. As well, your maximum heart rate can change over time as your fitness increases, etc. as well. So yeah, the best way probably to do for most of us would just be to look at your historical data and then work with that. So these are kind of, again, rough and average, like James said earlier. Obviously this is going on the general population, but heart rate zones, unless you're really going to go into a lab, but we're just going to use this.
Yeah, just very important to know, yeah, pinch of salt, and these are individual to everyone, but this is a generalization.
Yeah. So we've got 5 different zones. Obviously the top one is 5 and we're working down to 1. So 1, like we're looking at 50%, 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate. And a lot of people will be kind of doing maybe brisk walking or maybe some gentle cross training. You're going to be in zone 1 for. Yeah. Zone 2 is the elusive, magical zone 2 that we all talk about. And actually, sometimes it's very hard to actually sit in zone 2. And a lot of us maybe then sit in zone 3, which we sometimes call that grey area, but here it's green. But yeah, zone 2, we're looking at doing actually a lot of our work. And when we say the 80-20 rule, this is where we want to be doing 80% of our work in this zone 2. So it's 60 to 70%. That can maybe go up to 75%, again, depending on your heart rate zones. But this is where we're looking to do a lot of the work.
Well, that percentage is effort level, not percentage of heart rate.
Yeah. Then we're moving up to zone 3. So although this says that this improves your aerobic fitness, this is kind of more working into the tempo zone, pushing up that threshold.
Yeah, in a 5 zone world, zone 3 can be blurred. Like, so if you're in zone 2 for a longer run, you are naturally going to creep into zone 3 because that's where endurance comes. On a tempo run, if you were going to be working towards the bottom end of zone 4, top end of zone 3, you're going to be starting in zone 3 because you're not going to go straight into zone 4.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a transitional zone, we could call it.
And maybe that's why some people kind of find that they do some of their training in zone 3.
Yeah, and likewise, like
that.
I was kind of skipping ahead a bit here. If we call in zone 4 the tempo zone, you definitely wouldn't want to be in there. Say you're doing an hour of tempo, you wouldn't want to be in zone 4 in the first sort of 15-20 minutes because, well, you're not going to be in zone 4 for the last 20 minutes for sure.
Yeah. So zone 4, yeah, like we say, we're kind of creeping up further than that. And then zone 5 is maybe where you're working a lot more at your shorter based intervals.
Yeah, and again, like you're not going to be able to hold zone 5 for long. And also everybody here, whether you're training for a 5K marathon or beyond, you're training for an aerobic event. So you're very, very rarely going to hit zone 5 in your training.
Okay, this was just another kind of example of heart rate, same very similar thing. This one just had some example interval duration. So as you can see, zone 5, like 0 to 2 minutes there, what we're talking about is that really like short interval bursts. Hard efforts might be, yeah, that 2 to 10 minutes, but you know, that might be where you're doing like broken tempos as well and that kind of stuff. Moderate 10 to 40 minutes, again, that might be where you're kind of doing sustained efforts of half marathon pace. And then obviously light, we've got 40 to 80 minutes, but again, that can go, yeah. We're going to go longer than that one, especially when we're marathon training. So just a little bit more about kind of the zones. So zone 1, what we kind of call like the warm-up zone, this should be like really relaxed, easy. Breathing should be relatively comfortable at this stage. Zone 2, comfortable. Your breathing obviously is not like, when we say easy, you're not just going out for a walk, like you're still actually exercising. So this is sometimes where easy is probably sometimes the wrong label for it. But yeah, we're looking for it being comfortable, controlled and relaxed.
Relaxing, yeah, it's a good word.
Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, just with zone 1, like your warm up will creep into zone 2 towards the end, and that's right because you're warming up.
Yeah.
Likewise, when you're warming down, you're going from zone 2 to zone 1, hopefully.
Yeah. So zone 3, this is the aerobic zone, a bit more moderate paced, more difficult to hold a conversation, but you should still be able to kind of slightly talk in this. Threshold, faster pace, comfortably uncomfortable, as we like to call it. And this is then when you're kind of pushing that threshold and you're working at your body becoming more efficient.
Just important as well to remember here, we're talking about heart rate zone. So when we refer to threshold, this isn't like lactate threshold or turning point threshold. This is threshold of your heart rate.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously zone 5 is that maximum top end sprinting, faster efforts, and it's not very sustainable for a long period of time. Labored breathing, but also again, still probably a bit controlled.
Yeah, if we're talking about zone 2 being relaxed, I think with zone 5 being the keyword power.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, heart rate zones we displayed and calculated based on percentages of your maximum heart rate. These can be customized and you can change them in your Garmin Connect app, because if you haven't, most people's will just give you,
it just works off sort of historical data.
Yeah.
What you do.
I've sold this story before probably, but I've met someone in the past. It was a female. She's been able to run sub 3 hour marathon before in the past. But she has quite a high heart rate. And her like zone 3 and zone 4 were very close. That amount of beats per minute, they weren't far. So they didn't work on the percentages. So it's just important, just don't rely on data and what it tells you. This is why we're going to go more into kind of effort and pace-based training, as this is something that we like to lean into a little bit more here within the Running Hub. So some pros and cons. Pros to training to heart rate is that obviously you can work in the certain zones to build your fitness and not overwork or overstrain yourself. Heart rate responds to stress and environment. As we all know, we're not full-time athletes. We all have jobs. We all have commitments. We all have social lives. We have families. And so these also then impact our training. So sometimes when we then go to effort and pace, actually, if you work to heart rate, you're going to be better because of what's going on in your life. And as well, it teaches you how to respond in different situations. Cons is obviously it's difficult to obtain the accurate data to start off with. So sometimes you're kind of just going off blind to start off with. And yeah, it's difficult to know your zones. And sometimes doing heart rate training in intervals and shorter stuff is difficult to get right because your heart rate is not always going to go up super quick.
We did a comparison once, didn't we, on a chest strap versus wrist base for an interval session. It was the same intervals you and I did. And basically on my chest strap, you could see the sharp lines of it going up through an interval and dropping. But in Katie's, it looked more of a curve, and it wasn't because of the different style fitness, it was just because of the delay on a wrist based.
Yeah. So has anyone got any questions about heart rate? Also just wanted to kind of share this story about heart rate training. So I've shared this with a client, literally maybe my days are blurring, yesterday. So historically my heart rate has always been a lot higher. Even when I'm like running really easy, my heart rate still can lift quite high. So I have learned over the years to just work more on pace and feel. Certainly a lot more effort. And there was a run, I think it was like the day before the winter half marathon. I think it was like 21 or 22, maybe 21. And I was racing the next day, and we were going out for an easy run, a little shakeout run. And I think on my watch was relatively new, a new model at the time. And I was like, James, my heart rate's like lifting, it's going really high, we're on an easy run, I'm talking, what's going on? I think just because seeing the data on the watch was making it continue to go up high. And so James told me just to turn off the heart rate screen. And I did that. And so then the next day I was able to race truly to feel and to effort. And I did really well. And since then, I just don't have heart rate on my watch when I'm training, and I look at the data when I get back. So then I think it's just important, because if you keep looking at your heart rate data when you're on a run, you just obsess over it and you can just see it just goes up and up and up.
Yeah, what's really important there is you've got 3 sort of matrix while you're running, which are pace, effort, and heart rate, and understanding that they all don't necessarily work together. They correlate, but just because your pace is going up or you're going down, that doesn't mean your effort's going down and your heart rate's going down. So just make sure you're keeping all 3 detached and keeping them honest.
Yeah. And so today's run, the last section of my run felt a little bit more challenging today. It was slightly uphill. I was getting hotter. I think I didn't take any water out with me today. And then on reflection, I came back and my heart rate was a bit higher in those last kind of 15 minutes. So it just maybe goes to show that I should have just dialed it back a little bit.
Yeah, if you're going to keep effort at the right level, pace might have gone down and heart rate would have stayed the same.
Yeah, but my pace pretty much stayed the same throughout the whole run. So just to note, if anyone else does struggle with that, then, you know, sometimes it's actually better to remove certain data points and use them as tools post run. So anyone got any questions on heart rate based training? And we're not here to say that like heart rate training is bad at all, because it can be a really useful tool. We just
used correctly.
Yeah, there's obviously we find that training to effort can have a lot more benefits and make it a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, I think heart rate is a really good data to use as a sort of reflection piece. We spoke about this last week in the Run Hub Plus call about, you know, a good sign of fitness would be correlating your heart rate with how you felt afterwards and seeing the data over time. I think reacting to your heart rate in the moment is quite often a bad idea. Although that being said, when I was doing a session last week, which was the day after the retreat, so obviously I was quite tired anyway, I could see my heart rate was quite high quite early on, and I did have quite a crap session, so that was quite a key indicator as to what was going.
Yeah. As well, I know a few people that are quite into kind of like cycling as well. In the hub have gone and done, like, you can go and get bike testing, lactate testing done the same as you can with running, and they've used that data point whilst they're on their bike to work in the right training zone. So yeah, it can be really useful, but it's having the right and accurate data to back that up. And like James said, I think with heart rate data, you shouldn't start off heart rate training. It should build that data up over time and then use it, because like,
yeah, when you're talking about like having the right data to record things, it doesn't matter. Like whatever you have is right, and data builds up, and that's what's going to give you the best options. So don't, when Katie works by wrist, it looks like her heart rate's 170 off the same watch all the time, but she knows that's her easy effort, so that's fine, and we'll work with that data. So don't worry about the numbers. They're individual to you as long as they're consistent.
It's got better than that now.
Yeah, probably.
Don't make me too bad. Okay, so pace training. Now a lot of people, when we're working to, I'd say speed sessions, we find a lot of clients like to know certain pace targets in their heads that they can hit. So obviously training by pace is following set paces on all of your runs. And sometimes these pace targets are determined by your target goal. So it might be that, right, if we're targeting a 5K, we're going to do 12 by 400s, and we're going to be targeting your 5K pace or slightly quicker to kind of build into that. It could be that you have just done a recent race. We know then what to pitch the other times around that at. Or it could be, if you're targeting a certain marathon pace, then we're going to do some work in your long runs or in a session with that target marathon pace coming in. So it's quite clear, it's quite defined. We all know, like, our watches can tell us what pace we're running at, and it helps to kind of hit that. Yeah, there's not really much else to say.
Yeah, I just say, remember with pace training, it's very specific. So, we talk about effort a lot of the time. If you're training in adverse conditions or some environmental factors around a different sleep, stress, work, remember that pace training is not going to hit the right zones for you.
Yeah.
Bear that in mind. So that's, again, where effort comes in.
Yeah, so this is kind of like, it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes when we'll set sessions with people, we're like, right, 5K effort, and they're like, right, what pace is that? And it's like, okay, we'll give you a pace, but we also want you to try and dial into effort. So obviously training to pace, easy to understand and try and execute it. Obviously the pace is immediate, so you can change it in training. So if you did a rep and you're like, oh, that's too fast, I'm going to dial it back and go a bit easier. Or if you feel like, oh, no, I missed the pace on that one, I'm going to try to put a little bit more effort into the next one. And obviously pacing can be useful for our sessions. Downsides to pacing, which James started to touch on, is that it excludes effort and doesn't take that into consideration, and also excludes environmental factors. So, for example, right now we're heading in the UK into summer. On some days, it's going to feel a lot harder to hit certain paces. It might be as well that you're sleeping less, say if you go into a barbecue or there's a concert you're going to, and if you try and train the next day, you might be feeling a little bit more tired, or the weather's going to be a bit hotter. And this is sometimes where training to paces is not useful, because it will, we all know what it's like. If we're trying to hit a pace and we can't hit it, we just automatically think that we failed the session. However, if you're hitting the right effort or the right heart rate zone, even though the pace isn't there, you'll still work in the right training zone, still getting the same training benefit, still getting the same training stimulus. When you recover and you adapt, you're still gaining that fitness.
Maybe not even the same, the exact.
Yeah.
The one you actually want, what you're after.
Yeah. And then sometimes it fuels our ego, which is great, but not necessarily training in the right zones. But so yeah, I think the downside to pacing is just how it sometimes can have a negative impact in our sessions. If we feel like, oh, I didn't hit the pace that coach set me, so that means that I failed. But that's really not the case at all. It just means that
there is a time and place for it, especially closer to races, where you do need to nail it down.
Yeah. So this comes on to effort-based training, and this is what we like to use a lot, and we encourage people to use.
Ultimately, get this down and you won't fail.
Yeah. We find that it's really important. If you can work to effort in your training well, then it means that you're going to have a better experience come race day as well, because you can respond to different situations.
Exactly. These are the tools you're going to rely on in race day.
Yeah, you can rely on your intuition, your how you're feeling. You can dial into that and know that either you need to hold it back if it's not feeling right, and you're going to have a better race because you've executed a better strategy, or it might be that actually when you're getting further on into the race, you're like, I'm feeling good still, and I feel like there's enough in the tank to kind of maybe eke out a few extra seconds or minutes off of your time. Obviously this comes with experience. You can't just get it straight away. Like, you have to do different types of sessions, different types of runs, different races. And that's why we kind of do encourage people to put themselves into races, into different environments to kind of test these things out. And one of the main things with, like, you know, we always in a lot of our plans, we're like easy pace, easy runs. It's just so that you really just dial into how you're feeling on that day, especially like we all know what it's like the day after an interval session. We're not feeling as fresh, but we're looking for that recovery and the right aerobic zone. And so actually, if you focus on effort and the pace is a little bit slower, most of the time you're going to enjoy it a little bit more. One of the feedback we often get is that when people actually rely on effort, they enjoy their runs a lot more. So yeah, anything else to add on that?
Spot.
Oh, thanks. So pros to training to effort is obviously instant feedback whilst training. If you're not feeling good, you can, and this is racing too, you can pull things back. I was actually listening to a podcast today and someone was talking about their marathon. They had a set time in mind, and 5K in, they felt this pace is not right, I'm going to dial it back. And they had a better run. Yes, they were slower than their target time, but they had a better run because they'd listened to how they were feeling and dialed back the effort. So yeah, really important to do that. Don't have to worry about your watch. Sometimes people find it really freeing when you can just cover the watch and you just run. It's quite a nice feeling because you're not worried about all the data points that are flashing up at you. And obviously, as we said earlier, it can be a bit more enjoyable. Bad things with effort is that we might push ourselves harder than necessary. And obviously, one of the biggest things we see is people running their easy runs a bit too hard, and easy not being truly easy. Also with effort, you might miss signs of fatigue, where sometimes, you know, like James said earlier, in that session the other day, he saw that his heart rate was higher. And that then obviously gave him the instant kind of feedback that he was a bit fatigued and maybe needs to dial it back. And obviously effort is subjective to everyone, and everyone always, you know, it's not something you can just learn overnight, easy effort. You have to feel it out in training for quite a little while before you actually kind of it might click.
Yeah, that's subjective to everyone. Just goes back to what you're saying earlier about people just need to practice. I think if you can really learn to hone in on your own effort and train honest, this is where the best training adaptations can be made, and therefore the best results most days.
So a little bit of a summary, and then we'll move on to question time. So mainly, obviously, within the Running Hub, we like people to focus on effort and pace. However, heart rate data can come into play potentially afterwards, and also if you've got the experience. So we like to use all three, but we like people to kind of dial into how they're feeling, because that's going to make it more enjoyable, as we keep saying. And heart rate data we can look at and analyze afterwards. However, also leave the heart rate data stuff to us as coaches. We can look at that, leave the science things to us, and we can tell you if you're in the wrong zones, in the right zones, and monitor that. And also then look at maybe if fatigue is creeping in, and we can adapt training plans accordingly. Obviously, as you get more experience with your running, this can help you develop and understand your zones a little bit more. And yeah, essentially you have to use the right training method which works for you. Like, you know, if heart rate training is, you know, what you enjoy and what really works for you, then great. If you find that heart rate data just kind of stresses you out a little bit, focus more on effort and pacing within your sessions. But essentially it's try not to overcomplicate it, and try and be in tune with your body and what's going to work with you, because what we're using this data for is trying to improve our fitness and build our performance. So you have to use these tools in the way that's going to benefit your training and your performance the best. So has anyone got any questions, or you know, does anyone want to share with us maybe what they use and what their experience is with different, you know, heart rate data, pacing, effort? I'll open it up to anyone.
Hi. So from my experience, David.
Oh, hi, David. Hi.
I've struggled. Hello. I've struggled with this numerous times. And James knows about this because obviously I really struggled to get into zone 2. The majority of my training was originally in zone 3, which obviously confused me. And James helped me obviously go through and actually adjust my heart rate. And actually, since then, I've gone leaps and bounds. But one thing I really do remember, I remember in the big half one year getting to a max of something like 175, and I didn't feel that at all. And it was really confusing for me and really quite demeaning to my, my mental state at that point, which obviously made me slow down. However, since then, I've just been able to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt. So what I'm trying to say is I kind of agree with everything that you've said. It is very much how you feel. And it's so difficult because James has been saying to me for years, try and do it on effort level, but trying to understand what your effort level is on those is so complicated. So I'm in a really good place because I've started to mature along the lines of my knowledge of it. And actually, when I'm feeling certain paces, so I kind of take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, but I love the stats all at the same time. So I'm kind of in between, if that makes sense.
I think,
Yeah.
I think when you say that, it kind of like I massively agree with you, because when it comes to training and running, I kind of love the data, but also I think if everyone could just have a stopwatch and work off data, off effort, like a bit hippie, it would be perfect. But there is a part both. But yeah, you're exactly right. I think people should take those learnings. Like, you were getting quite hung up when you were talking to me about I'm in zone 3, and essentially you weren't in zone 3. Your watch was just set up wrong. We were
It was
using
my watch telling me I was, yeah.
And that can be in any circumstance, when we sorted that out. And then with that heart rate bit that you said about big half, like, absolutely, I'm sure if anyone saw that in a half marathon, they'd be panicking. I wouldn't want to see my heart rate in the 170s till I'm flogging myself in the last mile or so. But there could be a million and one reasons why that happened.
I've been wanting to say this, but with a race situation, you're going to have the adrenaline, the excitement, the atmosphere. So I'm the same, like David, like if I look back on like my marathons, my heart rate, like I don't look at my heart rate during the race, but I look back on the data, I'm like, wow, I was able to sustain the pace for that long at that rate. But I think with races, your heart rate's going to be higher just because, like like I said, the excitement, the adrenaline, you're in like, there's just all of those different factors going on. So yeah, in that situation, it probably, in a race sometimes, unless you really rely on your heart rate data, just switch the heart rate off in a race situation, because then now you've got a lot of years of experience behind you to really understand what you should be feeling like at certain stages of your race.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember actually in New York, I didn't take a band, and obviously I normally train with a band, but I just took my watch and I had arm warmers on. And I'm not even joking, in the first 2 miles, my heart rate went up to 180. And I was just like, hold on, I'm absolutely fine. I'm not breathing heavily. I'm perfectly conversational. I don't feel this at all. Took the armbands off, and all of a sudden it shot down to 154 or something along those lines. So it's really interesting to know that obviously your watch isn't going to pretty much tell you accurately where you are. And there are little things like those armbands, for instance. For me, obviously that doesn't happen for everyone else, that can impact that. And it's just taking it with a bit of a pinch of salt and knowing that actually you're okay.
Yeah.
And again, like, I find it frustrating sometimes where someone will tell me like they've stopped their run or they've pulled something back, and I'll say, why? I go, because my heart rate was really high. And I go, did you feel it? No, my watch said. I'm like, cares to a certain extent. Like, if you felt absolutely fine, like, that's really what's telling you the truth, isn't it? Like, I think all of us could tell, like, if our heart rate went up to 180, we should all be able to feel that, or one night, or whatever it may be for you. So yeah, just being in tune with your body is great, and heart rate data is fantastic for reviewing and for planning your training going forward. But live in the race, know your bodies, guys. We've all trained well and got experience.
Yeah. And I think what you touched on first, David, saying about your like being in zone 3, I think if anyone hasn't ever tinkered or had a play around with their Garmin heart rate zones and just like kind of gone off whatever that's told you, that's like, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of an example, setting up a thing in your house and not, playing around with the settings before you use it. It's the same thing. So if anyone hasn't done that, I'd encourage you to do so, just so that otherwise, you don't want to be frustrated saying like, I'm in the wrong zones. It's like, well, don't let something.
You're in the wrong room, not the wrong zones.
Yeah. So no, thank you for sharing that. Thank you very much. Penny has put that she's also been using the different Garmin strap. Penny, try the tip that I said about just shifting it over slightly to the left and see if that makes a difference, because I found that that's made the world of difference to but also at the same time, at first I wasn't too happy. James had bought me that new chest strap and had spent
You will like it.
a pretty penny on it, so they're not cheap, but that has changed everything. So yeah, give that a go, and if you're still not happy, I don't know whether Garmin will, sometimes their returns policy will be quite good, so yeah, give that a try, and then if not, just send it back, and yeah, if the other straps working better for you, keep to that. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else got any other experiences with training data, or anyone got any questions about their current zones?
I got a quick question. So you were talking about all the Garmin stuff, like, the setups. Is there anything that you can recommend? Because I did have a play with it, and I think we had a chat about the KT last month. But I think on Garmin you can have it on based on percentages or based on max heart rate. What's the best one to have a play with?
So I think without going into a lab and actually finding out your specific, the best thing to do is set Garmin up so it's on the smart training. So essentially it will just work off your data. But to allow it to do that, you need to make sure you're wearing the same heart rate, training roughly the same, and give it a month or so to sort itself out, and then start looking at it. But what I would say is most important, rather than actually worrying about your zones, is just, okay, you'll know more about your specific training. But say your easy runs now are 140, and that feels right. The proof of fitness here really is, in a month's time, is your pace maybe a little bit quicker, effort the same, and your heart rate down a little bit. That's really what you're
Cool.
Yeah.
I got that Chorus strap, I think 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks now. So I'll see. I'll continue to use it. It's so much better, very comfy, no chafing of chest strap. So yeah, thanks for the tip, guys, because I do have a Garmin, so no Chorus works well.
reading it off your arm then rather than your chest, it will be slightly different data, but minuscule, but just gives you the watch time to catch up. Really. And because data is clearer with more of it.
Yeah, I've had someone recently do the same, is that they've switched over. They had an Apple Watch, they've now got a Garmin, and they were like, oh, my data, it's saying that my heart rate is a lot higher with my Garmin than with Apple. And I said the same thing, like, let's just collect a month.
Give it time.
Give it time. And then by the end of the month, the data was evening out, and they were like, okay, yeah, no, that's fine. My heart rate is in the right place. Yeah. So yeah, it takes time, but it's all part of the fun journey.
Yeah. I think it's so easy to overthink, like you've mentioned it. Like I did it the other day, right, where you said remove the heart rate data from your screen. Didn't even look at it once, and I just realized actually how much I look at the watch, as in the pace, the heart rate. Do I need to back off? Like you just said, James, that's funny, right? People say, oh, back off when your heart rate is like in threshold zone. But actually, sometimes that feels okay because you're going up a hill. It's not like you're, I can't talk. So I enjoyed the run, I think, 10 times more because we're just not focusing on heart rate. And you said, Katie, just look at it after, not during, because that just sometimes ruins your mood, because that does it to me sometimes. So yeah, great advice and tips. So thanks a lot.
It's something I thought of when we talk about zones. I couldn't tell you what my zones are, but I know my easy running is somewhere between 130 and 140. My threshold / tempo running is high 150, low 160, sort of half marathon. I know once I get to 170s, that's my interval training. So that data is more important than whether I'm in zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. So, and that I know just from historical data. Maybe that's more important. So actually, when you're talking about getting bogged down on things, we're getting bogged down in these zones, which essentially mean nothing. But I know where I need to be for them certain sessions. Like I know, for example, that 160 I'm talking about, I can do for sort of threshold and tempo, I can hold that for an hour, but I certainly couldn't hold it for a marathon because I'd be starting to burn away at that point. That would be 150. So that's probably a little bit more specific.
Yeah, and I could never even dream of having an easy run in the 130s.
I was just about to say, sounds unreal to me, but I guess again, everybody's very different.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, like my tempo runs are in the 170. So, and
Again, that's unique. And if
that's James.
Kate are working off the same zones, it'd be
That's James's like interval efforts.
That's good to notice though, and good to say, to be honest with you, because when I first started, a lot of the runners around me would have these really low heart rates, and I would get really a little bit anxious, to be honest with you. Like what you've just said there, James. My God Almighty, if a 120 heart rate for me is pretty much getting out of bed. So it's very interesting to say and to see the difference and not compare yourself to other people, because it's all about you. And I've learned that over time. But for years, and Katie, you'll remember this, for years I've always been, well, hold on, he's got a 160 max heart rate. I've got a 190 max heart rate. What am I doing wrong? And I've obviously learned throughout that time that actually, as we've said, everyone is different, and it's actually not about comparing yourself to other people. It's about you individually.
Yeah, and also just on that point, it doesn't really matter where your heart rate is. A key sign of fitness is actually being able to get it high and being able to get it low. Range is the key here.
Yeah, and that's actually the good sign of, we were talking about this before we jumped on the call. The best way to identify fitness is, yes, if your heart rate's coming down in your training throughout your block and you're still keeping to the same effort. But if you're like, when you're doing a session and you're running fast and then your heart rate's coming back down again quickly, that's a great sign of fitness, rather than worrying about what your heart rate can hit high.
Ultimately, your heart rate's going up because it's got a job to do, and it's to move blood and oxygen around your body. So the more efficient that can work, I rock it up and then rock it down, for winning.
Yeah, but I'm like David. I think I can walk and I can get my heart rate up to like 100, and I don't think ever, as soon as I put trainers on, it goes into like the 140s.
Yeah, but interestingly, you say that, and obviously I'm just going to use my watch data here. So I can have a low heart rate when I'm running, but my resting heart rate's never really that low. My resting heart rate's probably in the 60s.
Oh, that's because I stressed you out, that's why.
Maybe. But so yeah, but it's all individual to each other.
So yeah, I think the main summary and takeaway is effort and pacing during your runs. Use the data when you get back to analyze afterwards, which I think is good. A good sign as well is that if you're progressing through your training block, you're hitting PBs, feeling good, that's a sign that you're training in the right, correct way. The main thing, just enjoy it. We all love to push that a little bit harder in intervals. We love an easy run. I do. So yeah, brilliant stuff. Anyone got any other questions or anything else they want to chat about? Now's the time. On Penny's put, Katie, wait till you get to 60, then you will. Oh, there we go. That's the only way I'll get my heart rate down. Keep getting older. We should do a little competition, actually, see who can record the highest heart rate, because then I'll win.
It's probably not very specific to most of our endurance athletes.
No. No. All right, everyone. If no one's got any other questions, then we'll leave it there for this evening.
Anyone got any questions not related to heart rate they wanted to speak about quickly before we do anything else? Yeah, Stuart's just put he's adjusted to his heart rate, but that's working to easy runs, which he's really nailed the last few weeks. So
Good stuff.
good, keeping you honest.
Nice. All right, everyone. Lovely to see you all. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for the chat. Hope you've got something from today, and we'll catch up with you all later on.
Dave.
Thank you. See you later.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks,
Okay.
Bye bye.
Well done, Neil. Hope you're keeping your heart rate down.
Absolutely not. No. Thanks very much.
Cheers. Bye.
Good night, guys.
Bye.